Hey guys, so this week we read chapters 6, 9, and 10 in the Chady textbook, 5 in the Cassett textbook, and then we had 2 journal articles. Hopefully you read them. If not, you might get a little lost, but hopefully I explained things well enough in this presentation for you. So these chapters focused on social groupings and social identification. So grouping is found everywhere in society. You see learning groups in classrooms, teams in sports, partners in the workplace. All of these groups have an impact on how an individual or group perceives others. This reading summary is going to focus on several subtopics within the areas of relative deprivation, social identification and categorization, as well as how those groupings translate into the topic of racism. A little bit about me. I'm Alexis. I'm a special ed teacher. We're going to be spending the next 15 minutes together. So I should give you a heads up that the way that I view things is from that special ed lens. I took 2 psych classes in my undergrad. That's about all I got. So hopefully I view things different from the way that you do. And I'll be able to learn from you guys in the discussion board, and maybe you'll be able to get a different perspective from me. Alright, so I said we were going to spend the next 15 minutes together, so what are we going to talk about during those 15 minutes? We're going to talk about group versus self-deprivation, self-categorization theory, dimensions of social identification, cross-categorization, and racism, so that us versus them perspective. Alright, let's get started. First, relative deprivation theory relates to social comparisons. It describes feelings of discontentment that stem from the belief that one is worse off than another. So I see that Sally has all of these nice things, so suddenly I'm unhappy with what I have. Within deprivation, you can experience feelings of self-deprivation and or group deprivation. So self-deprivation is going to refer to your own feelings of discontentment, that you're getting less than what you deserve. Group deprivation, on the other hand, refers to feelings of discontentment on behalf of your group. So a group is simply a collection of people with shared characteristics that one identifies with. So this could be race, gender, occupation, political affiliation, and that's just to name a few. So within one's identified group, he or she will often deny personal suffering from discrimination that affects their group. However, people overestimate the extent to which their group is deprived and underestimate the extent of their own deprivation. So we'll see this come around again when we talk about racism. Just to give you an example, I am part of our local education agency, which focuses on equal compensation for teachers. So in that group, I see that teachers aren't being compensated enough, we're not treated with respect. But in that self, I make enough money to get by. I feel respected by my parents and my coworkers. So I'm underestimating how I feel that deprivation because, I don't know if I'm paid in accordance to what I deserve. But I'm happy with it because I have enough to get by. But I do see in teachers as a whole, they're not making enough money to support their families and things like that. Alright, so self-categorization theory. So that theory simply states that individuals tend to categorize their social world into discrete and social categories. In doing so, people define themselves. For example, I am a white female, so I can categorize myself into a white category as well as a female category. And this white female category would be my in-group. Other white women, people like me, but any group that's not like me, so Indian men, they would be my out-group because they're not like me, they're not my in-group. So there is a difference between that personal identity and that social identity. Self-categorization is talking about that social identity. So your personal identity relates to who you are as an individual, your unique characteristics, traits, quirks, who you are as a person. And that's what defines you. Now, social identity is different. This could also define you, but it's your identity within a group, and that can change based on your social context where you're at. But it's what characteristics do you have in common with that group. So, when and why do people self-categorize? This is a whole section in your Chady textbook if you're more interested in reading a more thorough review of it. So why do we choose to identify with one group instead of another? So the book is going to relate this back to salience. Salience is defined as how much someone self-defines as a member of this group and the extent to which they see shared characteristics and similarities within their group and dissimilarities from others. So, for example, I'm a teacher again. Sorry, it's all I can talk about apparently. So I fit into this category. It's based on my career choice, so I know I'm going to have similar beliefs. I'm going to like kids. I'm going to want to share knowledge with others. So that's kind of some of the traits associated with that category that I self-identify with. I'm not going to fit in with a career group, a self category of neurosurgeons. I have nothing in common with a neurosurgeon as far as I know career-wise. Please don't let me operate on you. I have no idea what's going on. So that's my outgroup. The neurosurgeons are my outgroup because there's nothing, all right? But the teachers are my in-group because, yeah, I'm a teacher. I share all of these qualities. We're super awesome. Things like that. So I'm going to have a higher view of my in-group rather than my out-group because I relate to them. I identify with them. I feel that I know how they think, what they do, and that's my group. So now we have dimensions of social identification, and I'm going to go ahead and warn you, this is probably the longest slide because there are 7 dimensions of social identification. So social identification explains that an individual derives meaning from membership in a group. Social identity theory posits that membership to social groups serves to enhance and maintain self-esteem. Social identification has as many as 7 different components, like I said. They're listed for you on the side. There's self-categorization, evaluation, importance, attachment and interdependence, social embeddedness, behavioral involvement, and content and meaning. All right, so instead of defining each of these, I would like to put it in terms of an example for you, because if you wanted definitions, you could just read the book. But you're forced to watch me instead, so let's try to make this productive. So I'm going to put this in terms of a problem that I see in my classroom. Again, I'm a teacher. It's all I know. So gangs. So self-categorization would be me saying that I'm in a gang called the Ducks. I'm a member of this group. I have similarities with them. I belong. I am a duck. All right. Evaluation is going to be how I view that membership. Do I view it as a positive thing? Do I view it as a negative thing? So I'm going to view it as a positive thing. It gives me high regard with my peers. I feel respect. I have power. It's a very important thing, and it's very positive to me. Now, gangs are not positive in general, but we're just talking about that self-perception. So then importance is how tied into my self-concept is this? I identify as a duck. I have friends with other ducks. The ducks, I am all about that. It's part of who I am. I define myself by my membership in this gang called the Ducks. So attachment and interdependence. So this is really a big deal in my opinion. I feel like this is why people join gangs. But it's that feeling that, you know, my fellow gang members are my family. We're connected, we're bonded, we have what's referred to as mutual fate. We get the same treatment within our community. And it's this big draw of, I finally belong somewhere. I fit in. We all depend on each other. They're going to look out for me. I'm going to look out for them. All right, so social embeddedness would be just how far my gang affiliation, my duck membership, is going to affect my social life. So I'm only going to associate with other ducks. I avoid and attack my rival gang members, the geese. I want nothing to do with them. I am a duck through and through, and that is a huge defining thing for me, is my membership in this group. So behavioral involvement refers to the extent that an individual's actions are dependent on that social identity. So I'm a duck. Maybe ducks are involved in illicit activities. Maybe we sell illegal breadcrumbs on the street. So I'm going to be involved with that because of my membership in this group. You know, maybe I only wear headbands that have duck patterns on them. Maybe I only wear certain things. I had a student who was a member of the Bloods, and so I never once saw him without something red on. He had this bandana. He would either put it on his head, put it in his pocket, tie it to his backpack. He always had it on, and he was always very intentional about wearing it. It was never a second thought. So that behavior that comes from his membership in this group was so impactful in his life because every morning he had to find the stupid bandana and tie it to something. So that's a little bit of a tangent. You're welcome. So finally, content and meaning. So that refers to the extent that the characteristics of a social group are going to reflect my individual traits. So maybe I am a super aggressive person. I'm with the ducks. We like to beat up other kids. You know, and as this gang member, I'm going to share the same belief system as my cohorts. We are all going to believe that lakes are better than oceans. You know, and I truly believe that my gang is going to hold an important role in my community. So, you know, maybe we keep those dirty geese off the street, pooping in everybody's yard. So my membership is an important part of my personal narrative. My story, my identity is wrapped up in this membership of being a duck. I hope that my example was helpful and mildly entertaining. But really, it's just all of the dimensions play such a huge role in that group membership. And not every group membership is going to be something as socially defining as gang membership. Maybe it's just being white. And so I don't often think about how white I am, but it still is going to have those same dimensions. All right, so what is cross-categorization? We know about self-categorization and social identity already. Now, cross-categorization is when individuals belong to a range of social groups, which can sometimes intersect or cross one another. Earlier I mentioned that I'm white and a woman, in case you didn't pick that up. So I categorize with other white people, which also includes men. But I also categorize with other women, which includes multiple races. So you see that crossing of those groups that I'm involved in. So in terms of in-group versus out-group, us versus them. So this is important. People process information differently when they belong to these cross-cutting groups. In-group and out-group members are viewed in a more differential and inclusive way than when we look at them from within the context of a single category. So it's no longer as easy as us versus them. Remember salience? We talked about it a couple slides ago. It's defined as how much someone self-defines as a member of this group and the extent to which they see shared characteristics and similarities within their group and dissimilarities from others. So when we look at cross-categorization, the salience of just any one category is reduced. We are no longer members of just one category, but we are a collection of different groups. So this really increases positive outgroup perception. It increases how we view others. We're more welcoming, we're more inclusive because we are no longer just members of one group, we're members of multiple groups. Alright, so we're going to talk about racism. Racism is a really powerful example of conflicts between the in-group, which is my group, and the out-group, which is their group. So while there are several types of racism, and we're going to talk about modern racism, aversive racism, and implicit racism. So typically when you think of racism, you often associate it with groups like the KKK, protest. I'm in Charlottesville right now for our conference. If you remember the Unite the White rally, which was a really big deal. And I could go on that for quite a while. So I'm going to skip that. So it's associated with this outright hatred, but often it takes a more understated approach, which is where these three things come in. So modern racism is subtle. It's easy to rationalize and can often go unnoticed. Aversive racism takes a slightly different approach. It's embodied in what the textbook says is ambivalence between fair-minded attitudes and beliefs and unconscious and unrecognized prejudicial feelings and beliefs. So I don't even realize that I have these racist beliefs, but it still comes out in my actions. So implicit racism is unintentional and unconscious. It's the small ways in which an individual shows a preference to his or her own race over or against another. I had one of my students call me out for this. So I teach about 70, 80 students, and only a very small percentage of them are white. Most of my students are African American. And I had a white student come in and wanted to turn something in past the deadline. And I had my African American students say, but when Deshaun tried to turn it in, you said it was too late, but now the white student can turn it in. And I had no basis for my decisions except, yeah, sure, I'll take it. And so that's that racism that, like, we don't even notice, guys. We don't even realize that we're racist. And that's really a big deal. So while there are a lot of people who have racist tendencies, there are a lot of people who will identify as racist, unfortunately. Most people would say that we're against racism. We believe in equal rights for people of all ethnicities. But very few of those people would choose to identify with a specific anti-racism movement or anti-racism group. So an example would be Black Lives Matter. While they do have some things in their belief system that might be a little iffy, they're about equal rights for whites and blacks. So Bashir, Lockwood, Chastain, and Noyce, I hope I pronounced that right, researched a similar concept but related to feminism. So people would say, yeah, I believe all these things. I believe that women should have equal rights, yada, yada, yada. But they wouldn't identify themselves as a feminist, which is so interesting because you hold the same beliefs, but you view a group as too radical, too outspoken. And so you distance yourself from the group even though you have the same beliefs. I just think that's super interesting that we choose not to identify with a group because they're too radical or too outspoken, despite having the same beliefs. Alright, so I know I promised that this would be 15 minutes and I've gone over my time. So I'm going to try and do this very quickly. My 2 questions for you. So as Christians, how does our view of others, the outgroup, impact our ability to fulfill the Great Commission? If you're not a Christian, how do you feel that Christians perceive and approach the outgroup? Are they welcoming? Are they judgmental? And then how can we improve that? How can we be better? And then the second question relating to your personal lives. We know that relative deprivation also relates to being overcompensated for something, which can create feelings of guilt. So when you feel that you're being overly rewarded or overly compensated, what do? Do you typically ensure that everyone else is going to be fairly compensated? Do you justify your reward? How do you deal with that? So, all right, here are my responses. I'm sorry I went over time. I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you for spending 20 minutes with me, and I look forward to reading your responses in our discussion board.